story of a model torn between love and success in the podcasting world.
You think any of this crap means anything to these people around here?
It means something to me. Do you know where you're going to? Do you like the things that life is showing you?
I'm taking maximum pleasure in introducing to you the charming
Soul of Detroit.
You acid interrogative questions around my face. It's gone.
What are you doing? What are you doing? Come on.
That is not paid for by them. That is paid for by the people of Detroit.
You might be qualified, ML.
I'm not qualified for this job.
Let me tell you something. You want to go right now? Okay? You want to go right now, Albert?
Hey kids, it's your old pal ML Elric feeling a little wistful. We just had a classic intro by Mark Fellhauer, and we play it in memoriam because Mark is no longer with us. He's not dead or anything. He's just home, and we'll tell you why he's hanging at home while Sean and I are working hard, and Joe is here trying to keep this thing on the rails, which he's so good at. And there's a good reason why we're here. We could have punted. We could have said we're taking a week off, but
That's not the kind of boss you are, though. You know, it's the holidays. You don't want to give anybody any time off.
Yeah, it turns out for a union guy, when I'm in charge of something, I'm kind of a tyrant. Isn't that an interesting dichotomy? Fascinating.
You like being a boss. You know, it's okay.
You look fantastic framed there in my seat. I like, for the first time since we started this show over 3 years ago, Sean and I are going to see eye to eye, but only because our seat are adjusted at the same level.
Yeah, all I can see is your forehead. That's probably all you can see of mine. Of course, there's no hair up there.
It's kind of an 8 head.
Yeah, well, they're more of like an 8 chin, but a long forehead. But, you know, it is what it is.
It works for you.
The seat is hot over here, I should say. And I don't know that I'm going to be able to fill this seat, so to speak, but I will do my best.
That's all we can ask. That's why I've already set up a fine assortment of participation trophies that will be handed off after the show. And this is a special show because we are joined by Cheryl Costa, who will tell us where you can spot a UFO. In fact, Cheryl is the author of a book called UFOs in Michigan and Where to Find Them. But there's a lot more to this book than just which corner you can stand at and see if E.T. is going to drop by on his flying bicycle. There's a whole methodology that Cheryl has introduced to the UFO game that heretofore hasn't been employed yet. So Cheryl zoomed in from a celestial location to talk to us about that. Cheryl, thank you for making the time this morning.
Happy to do it.
And all this is made possible because we have some generous sponsors. Luke Nowacki of Pinnacle Wealth Strategies and David Hall of Hall Financial. I saw Luke Thursday at the Killer Cares fundraiser where we raised over $100,000 for children's charities. And I should probably apologize to anybody who was put off and didn't come out to it because last week I erroneously referred to it as the Killers Care fundraiser, which perhaps killers do care, but they have nothing to do with Tom Kowalski, who was the killer, the guy with the big heart who started helping kids so many years ago. The mantle was picked up by Matt Riley, and he's just done a fantastic job raising money for a great cause and bringing a lot of people together to have a really good time just before the holidays. I feel a little guilty wanting to talk so much about Michigan football without Mark Fellhauer here because I think he may think that I am basically running down the field with nobody in front of me because this is a good time to talk about Michigan football if you're a Michigan football fan. Obviously, I am not, and I've seen some things with the program that aren't worth cheering about, but we'll try and keep that to a minimum and get into it at the back of the show because Sean had an outstanding column about what's going on there. Mitch Albom even got in the game with a few on-point words about Michigan that you might not be used to seeing from someone who's so closely associated with the program, the author of the best-selling book about Bo, the author of I think also a best-selling book about the Fab Five. But some things have been happening in Ann Arbor that we have to talk about, even if some folks would prefer that we not talk about them. But I'm going to try and be gentle because I know Mark would want to wrestle over this, and perhaps we can get into that when he is feeling much better, which is really what we hope, because he's dealing with a case of COVID right now. We think that he will make a full recovery. And if he didn't, we're going to separate all his goods and enjoy the many wonderful things that he leaves behind, which, Sean, I don't know if you have dibs on anything, maybe that Chelsea flag or something. I'm going to let you have all the big M branded stuff.
No. You're the bird circling over the road, so you go ahead and do your thing.
It's, I think the name of that bird is vulture, but
Well, I didn't want to say that.
we all play our part in the food chain. So there's nothing wrong with carry on, and we will carry on with our guest. Cheryl, thank you for zooming in from Cleveland and talking to us about a subject that we first learned about your expertise through a column that Neil Rubin wrote in the Detroit Free Press. As always, Neil writes some amazing stories about amazing people and always finds a way to make a turn of phrase that readers will remember. This must be, in the 30 years I've known Neil, the first time that I'm aware of him working the phrase anal probe into a story. But it's he is a wordsmith. But you're not talking about alien abductions so much. You're talking about where we can see these little green men, or at least their conveyances.
Standards are looser than they used to be, right, Michael?
Well, it's the newspaper business. It's evolving. Let's just say let's say it's evolving.
Either that or we're desperate.
Those are not mutually exclusive.
That's right.
Evolution is about desperation, right? You want to survive, so you do what you have to.
Well, maybe the UFO folks can lead the way, help us out of this.
Well, first we got to meet them, and Cheryl can tell us where we're most likely to do that. Cheryl, thanks for joining us.
Happy to help.
So talk a little bit about this book and what it is that you have done to advance a subject that's been around for decades. Some would say suppressed by the government. Others would say rightly ignored by the government. But things are changing, as you and I talked about the other day. This was a subject that at one point I think you would have been ignored or laughed at by your congressperson. And now Congress is talking about studying this and actually putting some money into some, I would think, more above board research than they have in the past.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Very much so, especially when you consider the scale of the amount of reports we've had in the past 20 years.
So how often does this happen? I mean, should I be looking for UFOs like shooting stars? Is it something in between a harvest moon and Halley's Comet? I mean, what's going on in the skies?
Okay. From 2001 to 2020, which is the period of time my spouse and I studied, there was 167,632 in the United States. And those are the reported ones. So what that averages out to is about 8,000 a year, roughly. And basically it works out to about 23 a day are reported in the United States.
Okay, so that's 167,000. That is not that's a lot of weather balloons, I guess.
Yeah. Now I tell people, there's a certain amount of, misidentifieds and things like that. And people will always say, "Hey, Cheryl, when you guys were compiling the book, did you take out the kooks, nuts, and crackpots?" And I said, "Tell you what," I said, "if you want the real numbers, let's just take 70% off the top and say 30% is the real thing." Okay. And that still comes down to something on the order of 200 in the United States, 210 a month, every month for 240 months of the last 20 years.
That's quite a few. I mean, it's a big country, but you would think with that many, we would, I guess with so many people, the odds of actually seeing one are not that high. But there are some places in Michigan where you're more likely to see a UFO than other places. Can you talk about where those are?
Let me go back for a second with what you just said. A piece of statistics that was done in a couple of polls, national polls, one with Fox Pictures in 2017 and one with Gallup in 2019. And basically they said that 16.74% of adult Americans say they've seen a UFO. And when we've cranked it back and did the statistics, it seems like only one in about 250 people reports what they see.
Okay, so you're telling me that 16 out of 100 people have seen a UFO. I personally don't know 16 people who have said they've seen a UFO, even though I know more than 100
but
people.
there's a stigma. There's a stigma.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. Are they just shy, or are they?
No, both. It's either a little bit of the stigma. Heck, I wrote a newspaper column for 7 years for the Syracuse New Times, and even before I mounted that project, I had to really do some serious thinking. Do I want to do this? And so the bottom line is, yeah, a lot of people see them. A lot of people either are afraid to report them because there's been this stigma, they'll be laughed at or something like this. And then there's also a lot of people don't know where to report them. Okay. And so when we wrote our column, we always put a little banner here. Here's the two national reporting services. They respect confidentiality. Please report what you see.
So the Uncle Sam has 2 phone lines set up to hear from people who have seen little green men?
No. These were civilian organizations, one called the Mutual UFO Network. They're based in Ohio. They're based in Ohio now. And then there's the National UFO Reporting Center. Both of them are on the web. You can do a web one. You can do it anonymous if you want. If you want some response, you have to give them some information to talk to you. But the bottom line is these 2 are available. One of them is publicly. You can go actually read what they've got. And that's the National UFO Reporting Center.org. It's newfork.org. And you can go actually look at what people say their sightings were.
Sure.
But let's talk Michigan. Michigan is in the top 10 of states for sightings, ranks number 9 of 50. Okay. And on an average, Michigan had about 5,542 for the 20 years, an average of about 277 a year, 23 a month, about five a week, and maybe about 1 a day.
I was just going to ask, what's number 1? Is it Florida?
No, number 1 is for states.
Yes.
It's California, Florida, and Texas.
Okay.
And
so where the most people are.
No, don't go there. Don't go there. Everybody says more eyes on the sky, population. Let me give you a flavor. Florida has more sightings than Texas, but people argued with me when we came out with our first reference book in 2017. They said, well, but Texas has twice the population. There are things called influencers that we discovered. There's drivers and influencers, and one of the influencers is bodies of water. Florida has 1,200 miles of coastline. Texas has 400.
So UFOs want bodies of water?
No, we're talking about people being able to see them.
The light has to do with the light?
Hal, to some degree, yes. Okay, here's the drivers. Population is obvious, okay? There is the issue of temperate weather. Sightings during the season in the northern states, like Michigan, you'll have a peak. If you go January to December, a peak in the June, July, August timeframe. Okay, and then the rest of the year it's a quiescent amount. And the people, those are people who are outside all the time. Shift workers coming out for a smoke during their shift at the factory. Dog walkers and smokers. In fact, if we didn't have smoking dog walkers, we wouldn't have as many sightings as we do reported.
Yeah, I was thinking with the vapors, I imagine our number of spotters is increasing.
No, I'll tell you that. I have people jump on that all the time because most of the sightings are on Saturday night. It's also one of the other drivers is leisure time and hours of darkness. And we've been able to prove it. While you may look at a major city and say, well, that's where all the sightings are. If you go out and start looking at the hours of the day, it all happens between about 7 o'clock at night to about 11:30, with the peak of it between 8 o'clock and 11 o'clock at night. Bedtime hours. People are going out for that last smoke, a last drink out on the deck, a walk with the dog, whatever the case is, or coming back from something, and and sometimes, if you go to some places like Nevada, you'll see the numbers start to fall off after midnight, like every place else. Okay, they start to fall off, and there was a peak at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 4 o'clock. And I showed it to an investigator out there, and she says, "Oh, that's when the clubs and shows let out." So it's as much about human activity as it is ET.
Yeah, but after midnight on Saturday, I see all kinds of things that the next day I think, was that something that was inside of me or something that was inside of the sky.
But people who are loaded or stoned don't fill out UFO sighting reports. It's got the charm of filling out a credit application.
Okay.
Are there sightings among pilots? Because I would imagine, right?
Yeah, but they have not been big about reporting them because there was a career. There was an issue of, again, the stigma that you might lose your job. I've talked to a number of people over the years who were pilots that got desk jobs after they reported something. Only now are they being encouraged to report what they see.
No, it's getting a little bit of mainstream acceptability. You were in that world, or were you in that world a little bit when you were in the military and Lockheed? Because obviously they make planes.
Yeah, well, I had nothing to do with planes. I was an IT geek, but okay, 2 years in the Air Force, combat veteran in Vietnam, and then in the Navy for about 7 or 8 years, and was in. I can't tell you what I did, but the bottom line was I was in the Navy and I did some analysis and information gathering, we'll call it. Okay. But when I went to work for Lockheed, I did become a data analyst. So when I was retired out in 2012 or 2011 timeframe, I was no longer under the pressure of a clearance. That meant I could probably talk about UFOs and not lose my job. So I was pitching. I have a degree in entertainment writing, so I started pitching the idea to various newspaper editors. Got laughed out of the office, chased out of the office, that kind of thing. And then finally, one editor said, "Come on over, let's talk." So we sat down and talked. He said, "I'll try you out for a month." And I was pitching the online edition of their paper. So we did it. About 4 weeks later, he called me up and says, "Get over here. We got to talk." I figured, well, that's it. At least I got 4 articles up, And he came back and he says, "You're a rock star. Keep doing it." I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "You're pulling more page views on the web edition than all of our columnists combined." So we had a hot column there for 7 years.
Wow. And I wonder with these sightings, if the number of sightings shouldn't somehow translate to the number of encounters, because you talk a lot about where you can see them and where people are seeing them, but I don't hear very much about actual meetings. Are these visitors shy, or are people shy about saying, as Neil suggested, the term
we call them experiencers or
okay.
abductees. Experiencers or abductees, okay? Experiencers is the better term. And again, the stigma. We've had this stigma since 1968. Don't tell anybody. There used to be a joke in one of the movies I saw. There was this big thing came down, and Joe looked at Bob and said, "Wow, did you see that?" And the other guy says, "No, and you didn't either."
Right.
There was that whole mentality, that you don't tell anybody what you see. And I know people who have been disowned for reporting what they saw, that type of thing. So the bottom line is we estimate, like I said, 1 in 250 people reports what they see. So the numbers are very big. The other big thing is in Michigan, you've got a lot of stuff going on. Excuse me. Your Northern Peninsula actually has a lot of sightings.
Okay.
You
mean the UP up not up north, but in the Upper Peninsula across the Mackinac Bridge.
Yeah.
Okay.
They have a huge amount of sightings. But if you look at a major city, we'll say Grand Rapids or Detroit or Lansing or Flint, there's a pretty good series of numbers. Give you an example. Grand Rapids, 163 over the 20 years. Detroit, 152. Lansing, 121. Flint, 83. Wayne County, that has a bigger number, like 666. Oakland County, 600. Macomb County.
Yeah.
Okay, they had like 400. So, and the beauty of this book is we wrote 2 different reference books, one in 2017 and one in 2021. Okay, and we covered either 2001 to 2015 data or 2001 to 2020 data. Our objective was to sit out and do a 20-year study measuring the phenomena. Now, a lot of people doing UFO research have done the thing where they just focus on case studies. And think of it like this. Instead of individual autopsies, we decided to look at the disease model. something bigger. Okay. So instead of looking at one ant through a microscope, we looked at the anthill. And we learned a lot that previously was unknown. Everybody assumed population was the only driver. We found out that it wasn't. We found out there were 5 drivers. We found out there were about 4 or 5 influencers. And the UFO sighting reports are not always where you would expect them to be.
So where are they?
Where are they? Okay.
You mean just they're not in the huge population centers and that sort of thing, or?
Well, no, they can be. I'll give you an example. People say to me all the time, what's the hottest county in the country?
Okay.
Los Angeles County and Maricopa County, Arizona. Mm-hmm. Okay. And people say, well, wait a minute, Los Angeles, that's got all the light pollution. I said the county, not the city. The county has, as soon as you pull back from the big lights of the city, the rest of the county is a very big area, and they have the hours of darkness, and it's the suburbs and all of that. And these all play into it. It's a complicated mix of
not a lot of cloud cover.
Things. I'm sorry?
Neither of those places have a lot of cloud cover either. I mean, I know they have their seasons, especially Maricopa, but yeah.
Yeah, not much moisture. Cheryl, here's
think about how big they are.
Yeah.
Los Angeles County has more sighting reports than 39 individual states. And Maricopa County is number 2, and it has more sightings than 36 individual states. And then the numbers fall off. The absolute hottest zip code in the country for UFO sightings that had the most sightings in the country over 20 years was a zip code 85001, and that is downtown Phoenix.
So would you recommend or advise someone who really wants to see a UFO to go to downtown Phoenix and set up a lawn chair?
No, because that still averages out. It was 1,674 for 20 years. It still works out to only 4 or 5 a month. So if you're going to rent the penthouse on a hotel, you're going to burn somebody's credit card out.
Yeah, not to mention get a crick in your neck. So with this many sightings, do you believe that our visitors want to be seen, or they just get a little careless?
No, there's several of us now that believe they want us to be seen. Let me give you an example. When we published our first book in 2017, people said, well, Cheryl, why didn't you and Linda go back 40 years? Because there's this perception that 40 years ago was the golden age of UFOs. And the reality
that's when they also
was
saw us get into space, right? It's sort of like, hey, what are these guys doing with that rocket? You know, we better see what they're up to.
No, actually, it was about the nuclear weapons.
Oh, wow.
1945, we set off 3 nukes. In 1947, we have a wave of UFOs. Okay. So the deal is that all of this stuff happened back in those days. They reported this stuff in newspaper. A local paper would print a story, and it would bubble up to the wires. In 1968, Dr. Eugene Condon gave a report to Congress and said, there's nothing to spend money on here. You shouldn't bother. No government research. You don't need to do it. This stuff is nonsense. Okay. But what happened when he was doing that study with his team was the Air Force didn't tell him that the UFOs were turning off missile silos in Montana. Okay. So there was a lot of activity going on. So for the past 50 years, we've sort of had like a truth embargo on reporting this topic matter or talking about it sanely and not just instantly going into the little green men talk. Now, when we printed out our first 2 desk reference manuals, set 2017 and 2021, we went every state right down to the county level in every state. I got a lot of feedback from fans that said, but we want to know about our local town or our county, or something deeper down. So this new book, that's why we were doing all 50 states, and they'll all be done by end of January. Right now, we've got 20 done. Michigan was the number two, second one to be published. We are going in that book. We are going right down to the zip code and village level and everything that happened there. If they had sightings, you see it for 20 years and what shapes were seen.
Okay, so these visitors want to be seen. Why? So they want to be seen, but when are they going to land and give us the old, day the Earth stood still things where Klaatu comes out and says, "Hey, stop blowing shit up."
Okay, 1960 to 2000, the 40 years before our study, there were 15,150 sighting reports. Okay. 21st century, 2001 to 2020. In 2011, 2012, and 2013, I've got 14, 15,000 each of those years. Okay. We've got more sightings since 2001 than they had since back in the last 40 years. Something's up. Well, take a look. Our economy's at a tipping point. Our not economy, but our ecology, our environment. ET has been telling all the people they've touched, take care of your planet. Okay, so we've got an environment that's at a precarious point. We've got a mass extinction in process, and from the people who view some of this in sort of a mystical consciousness way, think of it as if you see one of these things, it changes you. It's like a spiritual experience. Okay, I've heard that from a lot of people I've interviewed. And the bottom line is that maybe they want us to see them because our government's not telling us about them and not being square with us. And suddenly they start showing themselves to Navy pilots 15, 20 years ago. Okay. A lot. Okay.
So these are,
they want us to know they're there. I think they really want to make contact, but why haven't they landed on the White House lawn? Think of them like anthropologists. They don't want to contaminate our culture.
so these are drive-bys, and they're trying to send us a message. And they have their own prime directive where they don't want to interfere with the course of our history.
It seems that way. Yeah. Okay. It seems like, well, think about it a minute. You send an anthropologist out into the Amazon someplace to this native culture that hasn't been touched by the outer culture, and suddenly 3 months from now you go in there and the kids are all wearing some team's t-shirts. That's the cultural contamination. And believe me, if they landed on the White House lawn and everybody and Joe Biden comes out with the heads of Congress and the Defense Department and says, yeah, they're real, here's Mr. So-and-so from wherever, they are going to be the darlings of all of pop media. They're going to be on Good Morning America. They're going to be on all this stuff, and our culture will be damaged by it or deeply influenced by it.
So do you think they have like a Galactic Geographic magazine where there's pictures of nude humans walking around and doing things that
I don't know,
that kids in their libraries are checking out during lunch and saying, look at these crazy guys
I have no
with
idea.
2 legs and no antennas. That's ridiculous.
They do refer to us as the dunderheads.
Well, so how do you know that? Have you met any of these? Have you spotted some UFOs?
I've interviewed a lot of experiencers.
Okay.
At conventions and things.
They call us dunderheads?
Well, they've been referred to what have the comment was, what have the dunderheads done today?
Well,
they think our culture is pretty goofy.
They're not very good guests,
give you an example.
I guess.
I'm sorry.
They said they're not very gracious guests. That's like staying at somebody's house and saying, hey, the towels are dirty.
No, it's like visiting your. It's like Thanksgiving. Uncle George came with the MAGA hat,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Or in my case, I'd go home and, hey, our UFO cousin got here. That was the attitude.
Right.
Okay. I think the biggest thing to explain from the experiencer's viewpoint, most of the ones I've talked to said those folks are great and they told us to take care of our planet.
Okay.
Okay. And there was I was very faked out by this because I kind of bought into that whole thing you saw on the upper cable channels many years ago. It says, oh, everybody got probed or something, right? And I was at a conference and they had a little morning meeting at 7:00 in the morning. Things at a UFO conference start about 9, go to about 5. Okay. And they had this meeting scheduled for experiencers at like 7:00 in the morning till about 8:30. And it was like an AA meeting or something, and so I asked for permission to go. Well, I was pressed and they didn't want me there. The second year I went there, I went to the psychologist who chaired the gathering and said, can I come? I want to learn. I won't out anybody. I won't write about what people are saying. He said, fine, go ahead. So I came. I was expecting to meet 25 or 30 people crying in their coffee. They got probed. To be honest with you.
Yeah.
That's what I was expecting. And my spouse and I got in there and there was like 150, 175 people in this meeting, and it had all the energy of a tent revival.
Oh, wow.
It was up. It was positive. It was, it was eye opening for me.
Is that just because the probing was good or because the probing's a myth? I mean, there's good probes and
there
bad
are
probes,
plenty
I
of
imagine.
people who have been medically examined by ET.
Okay.
Why is it I'm sorry, real quickly. Why is it that?
But that isn't the dominant part of what they do.
Why is it that the anal probe is what sticks out in the culture and not a probe down the mouth?
Whitley Strieber wrote about it in his book Communion back in '85.
Okay. And if you are going to get probed, make sure they do the mouth probe before the anal probe, and they don't use the same probe. That's just a little.
Again,
that's a little
please
advice.
don't center on that. They're not. They respect us as sentient beings.
Okay. Now, Cheryl, I need to know: have you seen a UFO, and how did you get interested in this subject?
I had 2 major sightings in my life before I started writing this column.
And tell us what they were like, and where did this happen?
One, I was 12 years old. It was a couple of weeks before school started in late August, coming down from my uncle's farm, coming off a hill. And my mother had father stop the car. We were in the middle of a cornfield, and she stopped the car and she pointed out into the western sky, and understand that there was no clouds that day. The sky was clear blue. Parked out there like a rock was this sphere. Okay. Silver sphere.
Okay.
And to give you an idea how big it is, if you hold your arm out, look at your little fingernail, that give you a ballpark idea of the perspective. And my mom said, well, it might be something NASA's doing. They were only about 5 or 6 years old at that point. It might be something the Air Force is doing. It might be a weather balloon, and it might be people from another world. And that fascinated me, the 12-year-old. So we got down the bottom of the hill and turned left to go back to our hometown. And I got up in that back window of that old Chevy Impala and said, who are you guys? Who are you guys? And when it decided to leave 15 minutes or so later, it was one of those gone things. It's like what you see with like the Starfleet movies now. The thing goes off into a blast of blaze, goes into warp or something. And that's what it was. And it changed me. And I started getting very interested in the topic. Got books at school, at the library. My mother bought books at the store. We'd talk about them. When Von Daniken's book "Chariot of the Gods" came out, I was dog-earing on the top. She was dog-earing on the bottom. Destroyed the book. I got in the military, and there only was a couple of UFO research groups at that time, all civilian kind of thing, and they were on these lists of things that if you want to keep your clearance, you don't join these groups.
Right. Okay.
So I basically had to keep it to myself. Now, I had a sighting when I was in the Air Force, when I was in Vietnam, on Christmas Eve, 1971. Can't tell you about it, but I had a sighting. My next real serious sighting didn't occur until June of 2012. I had worked for a newspaper at the time. I was in the technical department. I wasn't a writer yet. And it was 3:00 in the morning. I just come home. I put the car in the garage and lowered the door. I used to stand in my driveway looking at the Big Dipper. Okay. Especially if it was a clear night. Okay. And I was standing there just kind of letting the crap from the evening shift, fall off of me. And I started hearing this humming, pulsing sound. Boom, 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 boom. And I looked up and the stars above me were blotting out. And I realized it was a triangle shaped craft. And as it went by, it was probably only 1,500 feet off the ground, maybe 2,000 feet tops. And it was going off to the northwest. And I went inside, sketched it, made notes and everything, but I didn't have the nerve to report it in those days. Okay. And about 8 months later, I'm writing a newspaper column. It impacted me that hard. I said, it's time to come out on this topic. And that's when I went out and started pitching this to various editors. Funny thing about that sighting, while I managed to run across a record in the National UFO Reporting Center that synced with my dates and time. And it was a nurse coming out from one of the hospitals from shift about 3:30 in the morning. She saw it on our side of town from the other side of town. So to some degree, it was corroborated. It was amazing.
And it's a different shape. I mean, do you think that they just upgraded their technology, or that there are different visitors from different places using different vessels?
Okay, we have two sayings in this household. Linda says the truth is in the exotic shapes. I say sometimes that the truth is in the tiny numbers. Okay, in the exotic shapes, we have 29 known shapes, and there's new ones coming along all the time. Linda likes to joke. She's the co-author and the lead scientist on our project. She likes to joke that there's a cycle, 6 to 7 years. The sighting numbers go up and down, that type of thing. And she seems to think on the 7-year cycle, they must all go home and get the latest model of spacecraft, the new car, so to speak. But also some of the best UFO sightings, most what I'm going to call verifiable stuff. I had one particular shape I heard about on somebody who was on a talk show one night, and he was a researcher, and I went into my data and looked for it, and the number was so tiny. It was so close to the bottom of the graph, I could hardly discern it. I literally had to blow up the numbers, only about 100 a year, but it was very unique in the fact that it was as regular as you could set your watch by it. Okay, so it was very intriguing. But so there's a lot of complicated stuff. It's more than just flying saucers. Flying saucers are your dad's UFO. Triangles and wedges, chevron-shaped ones are the more common thing we see these days. They had a rash of them out in L.A. a couple of years ago. A good friend of mine is the chief investigator from MUFON in California, and he just regaled me with a bunch of stories about that. People were abducted, and they took some skin samples, took blood, that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, Cheryl, before we let you go, I gotta ask you, where are the places in Michigan that people are most likely, if not likely, but most likely to see a UFO?
Well, if you go purely by numbers, it would be Wayne County, Oakland, and McCobb. Okay. There's the top three.
Wayne State? Is Wayne State's the epicenter?
I couldn't tell you that. I can just tell you the county with the chart I got in front of me.
Okay.
Now, if people get the book, we've got a chart in the back. It's about 50, 60 pages. It starts with your county and the zip code, and you'll find your village underneath whatever zip code you're in, county and zip code you're in, and there will be the breakdown. So some places have more than others. Some places have had one thing happen in 20 years, and there's some places that have had nothing happen. We printed out a map, and it's in the book, zip codes. Okay. A state like Michigan, majority of the counties had sightings. Okay. But if you look at it from a zip code standpoint, it's like Swiss cheese. They're not every place.
Okay.
So it's more complicated than just population. Okay. It's more complicated than just hours a day. There's a whole bunch of things that come together, and there is a myth. There's a myth even in the UFO community. Oh, there's got to be some place that is so regular you can go sit up your lawn chair and bring us some sodas and a pizza and wait for them.
The Old Faithful spot.
Yeah. Well, I did a study last year while I was waiting for some data to be processed for me. And there's 728 one-day hotspots over 20 years. Most days, nothing's going on in your local area. Most things it's empty. 20 years, 50 states, it works out to 146,036 days over 20 years for all 50 states. And we identified in that only 728 that had something unusual. I'll give you a quick example. Indiana, it's a state that averages maybe 2 a week. What they in April 16th, 2008, they had 25 in one day. That event came to be known as the Kokomo Lights. Okay. And so it gives you an idea. Some places have this one day amazing event, and then nothing else happens most of the time.
Or they've been to Indiana once. They're like, that's all I need.
No. There's some states that have had multiple events like this, but they're nothing that you can predict.
I got you. Okay. Well, if you want to know more about where UFOs are most likely to be seen in Michigan or anywhere in the country, Cheryl Costa is the author of UFOs in Michigan and Where to Find Them. She will have all 50 states by the end of January. So if you want to know more, Cheryl, do you have a website people can go to?
Nope. We just tell everybody, go to Amazon, go do the book search, say Costa UFO. You'll get our stuff.
Okay, that's COSTA at Amazon UFO. Cheryl, thank you for keeping your head in the stars, as Casey Kasem used to say. Or no, keep your feet on the ground, your head in the stars. But Casey's from Detroit and Wayne County, so maybe he saw a UFO and maybe he's co-piloting one right now. But we appreciate your time and give us a shout if you get a heads up that they're getting ready to land over here. That'd be good to know. We might want to have those folks on the show.
The Congress guys may have something for us in the next month or so, publicly, one way or the other.
Okay, we'll be watching. Cheryl Costa, thanks for joining us here on the Soul of Detroit.
Bye-bye now.
Before we get to Geek of the Week, I want to tell you a little bit about the sponsors who make this show possible. Of course, Hall Financial has been one of our leading sponsors since we started. They're a sponsor of the entire Red Shovel Network. And with the holiday season coming up, this is a great time to consolidate your debts. The holidays can be expensive, and right now, credit card interest rates are the highest they've been since 1996. And if the Fed has their way, they may go up some more yet. These high interest rates and debts impact your everyday life. Using the equity in your home, you can get a cash-out refinance. That's a great way to help put you and your family in a better financial situation this holiday season. A free 5-minute mortgage review with Hall Financial is all it takes to get on your path to becoming debt-free. Whether you're looking to purchase a new home or refinance your current home, you need to call Hall Financial first at 866-CALL-HALL or go to our website, that's mlsoulofdetroit.com, and click on the Hall Financial banner for a special 5-star service, just like the service I got when I did 2 deals with Hall Financial. Hall Financial can save you a lot of money, so check them out. And when you go, make sure you let them know that you heard about them on the Soul of Detroit. Now, if you're not looking for some short-term financial gain, the guy who can set you up for long-term success is Luke Nowacki and Pinnacle Wealth Strategies. If you're facing a big financial decision, such as purchasing a new home, a new car, maybe even something cosmetic, it's important to know how this decision could affect your current and future financial goals. Luke Nowacki and his team at Pinnacle Wealth Strategies can help you plan for all your financial goals, both today and into the future. Call Luke today at 248-663-4748 for a complimentary consultation to see if your plan aligns with your goals. Because when you call Luke, he'll make it all about you, sweetheart.
Securities and investment advisory services offered through Royal Alliance Associates Inc. Member FINRA SIPC. Royal Alliance Associates Inc. is separately owned, and other entities and/or marketing names, products, or services referenced here are independent of Royal Alliance Associates Inc.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Do you think there are more sightings over Ann Arbor or East Lansing?
More sightings over Ann Arbor, at least. Well, it's hard to see the skies in East Lansing with all the couches burning. There's a gratuitous Michigan State shot. That's a good question. You could probably argue that East Lansing a little further from the city lights than Ann Arbor is, but I don't know. I mean, I would think Cheryl's book would have the answer to that question. But I think the real question is, are people who seeing these things really telling people? Because I think there is a stigma attached. And when I talked to Cheryl about coming on the show, one of her first questions was, is this going to be one of these interviews where you make fun of me? I'm like, no, I think this is a topic that people are interested in. And there's people see things and have beliefs and perhaps they've had experiences. I would love to hear from someone who's had an experience, good or bad, with someone from another planet who can let us know what that was like. I mean, it's some. Do you remember? It may have been the movie Communion with Paul Winfield, and I can't remember who the actress was, talking about how they were somehow, I don't want to say abducted, but transported to a spaceship, and it was a very positive experience, as I recall.
You sidetracked me there with Paul Winfield. It made me think of the Terminator. Remember, he was the police chief.
He was. He was also a captain in Star Trek who had that little worm put in his ear, and they tried to get him to kill Kirk, but he wouldn't do it. He just wouldn't do it. Defying Khan.
Yeah, defying the worm.
Yeah.
That's nice.
So it's and he also never listened to Dennis Rodman.
No, I'm glad that was a great get, and that was she was great. I'm glad we had her on. And the key, to me, those situations is to take folks seriously. All right, it's easy to punch down, and we try not to do that on this show.
No,
We
well,
punch each other.
yeah, that's
verbally, of course.
well. Of
But,
course, I'm always punching up because everybody's so superior to me, or so they tell me.
Well, it's the same for me. Punch up.
Yeah, I like that. Now, having said that, I'm about to punch down on somebody with our Geek of the Week.
Oh man, the geeks have inherited the earth.
Did I do that?
What a dork.
Does him wanting to play with us again mean that he's turning into a geek, or we're turning into cool guys?
So this is where if Mark was here, I might try and say Jim Harbaugh and Ward Emanuel are the Geek of the Week for their double standards and hypocrisy, but that's too easy. And if we're going to do that, we should have a spirited back and forth with someone who actually doesn't believe that, although, of course, I believe it in my bones. But and I said I'm going to punch down, but I really don't feel like I'm punching down on someone who hid $2.6 million in income from the federal government. That's a guy who's got a lot of cheddar. And you know who I'm talking about. You've seen the billboards. Car hit you. Attorney Carl Collins, I believe the third. He was recently convicted of tax fraud for failing to report millions of dollars in income. He willfully submitted 6 false tax returns for 2012, 2015, and 2018. The Detroit News reports that Collins put money from his business into an undisclosed IOLTA account, that's interest on lawyers' trust accounts, which are used to hold funds on behalf of clients. And this is one way he was able to hide that money from the IRS. In all, Collins did not report $2.6 million in income. And it turns out this is not the first time Mr. Collins has gotten a little shifty with some dough. In 2010, the U.S. Attorney's Office said he paid $5,000 in fines for being too quick to contact families of passengers killed in Flight 3407, which crashed near Buffalo. In other words, he was hearse chasing. His payment settled a civil action brought after he sent letters out 12 days after the crash. Definitely too soon and violating a federal statute prohibiting lawyer solicitations within 45 days. So, Carl Collins, we know where your money is, and we know that you are our Geek of the Week.
There's an all-night party in room 7609. You've got the time.
We come to Sean's favorite part of the show, room 7609. And Sean often tells me off the air that he feels like our listeners are a bunch of sniveling pond scum, one-celled organisms that barely have mitochondria and flagella to skitter around their little pool of dreck.
I don't remember 8th grade biology class, but you do. So
yeah. And
I've never said anything of the sort, but thank you.
Maybe I misheard you, but I completely disagree. I think they are some of the most erudite people out there with diverse tastes.
Yeah, because they like you and your podcast.
And peripatetic minds. I like to think of it as our podcast. I'm responsible
wandering minds
for the good parts, and then
What's wrong with wandering minds?
The other ones. Well, simple minds are better, particularly when you talk about new wave music.
Is that who we're playing?
No. But we asked people last month to give us their favorite new wave cover tunes, and then I said for December I would like to do some more female-fronted or female-based new wave bands. And listener John, as he often does, came up with a great suggestion that covers both last month's requests and this month's requests by suggesting that we play Susie and the Banshees covering Dear Prudence.